Many malachas in Shabbos are done through a groma. I don't know if you noticed. But bishul, for example, malachas bishul, is a groma, by definition. What's the malacha? You put the pot on the flame, and then an hour later it cooks. At the time you're putting the pot on the flame, you're not doing anything. Nothing's happening. It only happens an hour later. That's a groma. For example, zoireya, same thing. You put a seed in the ground, and nothing happens for weeks, perhaps months. You have zoira, the Gemara calls a groma zoira. You throw those chaff into the air with all the things, and the wind separates it. The wind is what's doing it. You're just enabling the wind to do it. That's also a groma. Many molachas in Hilchos Shabbos is a groma. So why are we chayiv on it? Why is one chayiv on bishul? It's a groma. The answer is because that's the malacha. Groma is only a heter if the malacha is, by definition, a maisa b'yadayim. Right? Then, if you do it in a grommatic way, then you are pater. But if the malacha itself is ba'ofen shel grama, the mashal bishul, right? So you're not going to be pater on it. That's the malacha. That's the definition. That's by definition. That's the malacha of bishul. So it's a very interesting thing. That means that certain malachas you'll be chayiv on, despite there being a grama, because that's the malacha. Now it's a very interesting shaila. The Har Tzvi declares the shaila. Merkavas HaMishnah says like that. Har Tzvi has a suffix. Merkavas HaMishnah says like that. What would be in those malachas, which by definition is a grama, and you would do it in a grama de gaifa? For example, let's take bishul, right? Bishul by definition is a grama, right? You're putting the pot on the flame, and only cooks an hour later. That's a grama. What if you will go ahead and take a pot and put it on a flame with a timer, right? Let's say you put it on a hot plate, which will go off only an hour later. So that's a real grama. That's not the malach of bishul. The malach of bishul is you're putting on the flame. Here you're not putting it on the flame. You're putting it on a hot plate, which will go on an hour later. So that's already a real grama on malachas bishul. Do we say that since bishul, by definition, is a grama, and the Torah asers bishul, despite it being a grama, so there's no heter of grama anyways, there's no heter of grama either. Even if you'll do it by official grama, you put it on a hot plate, which goes on an hour later, you'll know you have no heter of grama, but in such malachas where the Torah says that these malachas are aser, these malachas are aser despite it being a grama. If you'll add an additional grama to that malacha, it won't help the situation. You'll still be chayiv, because you see that the Torah is megaladas that a grama by such a malacha doesn't help, and that's what the Merkavas HaMishnah learns. Har Tzvi remains by a suffix. Why am I bringing up this topic? Because yesterday we were talking about bittul kli me'achanei, right? And bittul kli me'achanei, basically what it means is you're taking a keli, which is royal l'shimush, you're able to use it for all different sorts of things. A bowl, you can eat from it, right? And you're using that kli in a way where now you planted it in whatever place you put it and you can't use it for the time being. Right? So we said yesterday, that's an Issur D'Rabbanan. But the Issur D'Rabbanan is done ba'ofen shel grama, because it doesn't happen right away. It only happens when the shemen will drip into the kli, into the bowl. That's when it will become batel me'achana, because then you're not allowed to move it anymore, because the shemen is muktzah and you don't want to spill it out because you don't want to be mafsid the shemen. Whatever the lumdus is, but then you can't move it anymore. So it's also done by oifen shel grama, right? And nevertheless it's aser. So here there's an interesting Mishnah Brura. Mishnah Brura says, what if you will take the kli and you'll put it under, a very interesting thing. Let's say you have a leak right here, right? So this is the top of the table. You don't want to get the table ruined. So you put a kli under the table. At the time you're putting the kli under the table, you didn't do anything yet. Right? Because the kli is not bottled yet. You didn't put it in a place where the shemen is going to drip on it. So you put the kli under the table, and then you come up with the lumdus. I'll move away the table. So what did I do? Didn't do anything, right? At the time I put the kli, I didn't do anything, and then I moved away the table. What did I do? It's only a grama. It's a grama. So the Mishnah Brura is meduyik that you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. Not allowed to do that on Shabbos. Says Reb Shlomo Zalman Mincha Shlomo, why not? Because since the whole Issur of bittul kli me'achanei is anyways ba'ofen shel grama, that's the Issur, right? Let's say the table wouldn't be here. You put the kli down without the table. So what are you doing? Nothing yet. Right? It didn't drip into the bowl yet. And anyways it's also. Why? Because that is the definition. By definition, that is bittul kli me'achana. You're doing something which is ba'ofen shel grama that Chazal said is aser. So Shlomo says, and that's why even if you did it really ba'ofen shel grama, you put the kli first under the table and then you move away the table. That's why it's still aser. Because since the Isser D'Rabbanan is a grama, so therefore if you add an additional grama, it's not going to help you. Right? If you just put it on the table, then you move away the table, it's not going to help. See, I don't know why the person don't make a ride from this halacha to their shiloh of Noshel by Bishul. You know, by Bishul there's a lot of raid. If you're over on Bishul, if you put it on a hot plate which has a timer on it, right? Since Bishul by definition is a malacha of grama, so the Chayim Claire, do we have a heter of grama by such a malacha? If you add an additional grama. Here it's Mavur the Mishnah Chayra, and according to Shlomo Zalman's beer advar in the Mishnah that anything which is aser mishum grama won't have the heter of an additional grama. Interesting halacha to know. Now, the second, the Reish Samachay, move on. The last sif. It's a very interesting sif. I don't know if any of you do it at home. Do you guys do it at home? You take your candle or whatever it is, the glass that has the oil in it, and you put a little water first and then the oil. So the glass doesn't become... By Hanukkah you do it. Do you do it on Shabbos? Do it on Shabbos? Yeah, do you? Okay, so I like to speak about you never believe what could be going on. I'm saying this is a big machloikis, if you're allowed to do this. I want to speak about that for now. And the reason why this is all coming in is because we're dealing with Adlakas Neiros. So the whole flow in the Shulchan Aruch right now, similar to Samachay, is just, is just finishing off the last sif and the last halachos that are negate to Adlakas Neiros. And this is really the last sif that speaks about Adlakas Neiros is when you prepare the candles Erev Shabbos, you want to put in some water in your cup, in your glass cup that holds the oil, and you want to put water under the oil. Are you allowed to do that on Shabbos? Why not? So we need a hakdama, just a short introduction to the sugya. It's a very big sugya. I'm just going to try to condense it in a way where we could just get straight to halacha l'maisa. Okay, so now we know kibui is a machlokes in the Gemara whether you're chayiv on kibui, if someone extinguishes fire, are you chayiv, or is it only aser? What's the machlokes? Because every kibui, most of the time a kibui is a malacha she'ena tzricha legufa. Right? You don't need the malacha for the gufa davar. You just want the light out of here. So that's eina tzricha legufa. You're being mechabit because you don't want it here. So that's eina tzricha legufa. You're not doing the malacha lamashal. The only time tzricha legufa is if, let's say, you have a coal. You want the coal, so you're being mechabit, you're extinguishing the coal because you want the coal itself. That's tzarich legufa. You need the kibui for something tangible. But if you don't want it here, stamazai, that's eina tzricha legufa, and that's why it's aser. That's machlekes Rabbi and Reb Shimon in the Gemara whether eina tzricha legufa is chayiv or aser. We pass like Reb Shimon. Okay. Now, what about gram kibui? Gram kibui, if you do kibui through a grama. So it's a Gemara, gram kibui is mutter. Gram kibui is mutter. For example, if you have your talus is burning on fire, the Gemara speaks about this case. So talus is burning on fire. So what do you do in order to extinguish the fire on Shabbos? You make the talus wet on the other side. The fire hasn't consumed the entire talus yet, or the entire tablecloth. So make sure you pour water. It's good to know. But if your candle falls on your tablecloth and you don't start a fire, you want to make sure that you want to be able to extinguish it. So many people on a bahola, they extinguish the candle. It's awesome. You just pour water around it, and that's called gram kibui. Gram kibui.
No problem with kibbles. She use wine.
Shuyas is kibusay. Interesting. Perhaps. So you pour something around the tablecloth, so that's called a gram. It's only gram kibui. Gram kibui is mutter, especially if it's a hafsid meruba. The Gemara doesn't speak about hafsid, but al pi Allah, it's only if there's hafsid meruba. Now, there's a Mishnah in the end of the third parak. It's the last Mishnah. Mishnah says, if someone has a ner, and there's sparks falling from the ner, you have sparks falling off from the ner. So what should you do? You don't want it to fall on your tablecloth. So what should you do? You could put a kli under it and catch the sparks. Why is the bittul kli me'achanoi? It should be a problem bittul kli me'achanoi. So the Gemara says it's davar she'ein boi mamish. It's not bittul kli me'achanoi because the sparks is davar she'ein boi mamish. Now, are you allowed to put in water in the kli, so when the sparks hit the kli, the water extinguishes the sparks right away? You're allowed to do that. So the Gemara says, and Shulchan Aruch quotes, "Aval yitel l'toichei mayin," you're not allowed to put water in it. Afilu, and this is a big chiddush, guys. Afilu me'boid yoyim. You're not allowed to prepare. This is unbelievable. You're not allowed to prepare, right? A kli with water inside should catch the sparks, even if you prepared from before Shabbos, which is a huge chiddush. Why not? You're doing it before Shabbos. You're doing it before Shabbos. What should be the problem? That's a big chiddush. Why aren't you allowed to do that? We'll speak about it in a minute. So, before the Erev Shabbos Vart, the question is, even on Shabbos, why shouldn't you be allowed to do it? It's only gram kibui. The chayr is only gram kibui. You're putting a kli with water under the sparks, you know where the sparks are falling. It's gram kibui. We just said gram kibui is mutter. Why should that be awesome? Right, so the Gemara addresses this question. Why should it be asur on Shabbos? It's gram kibui. Gram kibui is mutter. It's only a gram. You're not extinguishing anything. You're putting a kli with water there on Shabbos, and the sparks fall in, and it goes down me'ela. It's only gram kibui. So why should it be asur? So here, there are many pshatim in Tosfos. Tosfos speaks about it. 3 pshatim in Tosfos over there, and 2 pshatim which I want to mention, which is negeya to the halacha of whether you're allowed to put in water in those little cups that we use to hold our oil and flame. So one teretz of Tosfos is that it's not gram kibui. It's worse than gram kibui. Why? Because over here you miskaven lechaboisai. Here you're trying to extinguish the sparks. Whereas, it's interesting. You have to understand what Tosfos is saying. Whereas in the case of talus, when the fire is spreading and you're putting water around the talus, you're not miskaven lechaboisai. All you're doing is you're just preventing the fire from spreading. You're just preventing the fire from spreading. That's called gram kibui. But over here, you're miskaven l'chabaisai. Without getting into the lamdas, I'm not learning the sugya, but that's the word. Those are the words of Tosfos. The other teretz of Tosfos is that it's different because here it's noifel l'toich hamayim. Noifel l'toich hamayim is worse. When it's mispashut l'tzdadin, that's gram kibui. When it's noifel directly l'toich hamayim, that's worse. So, like which teretz of Tosfos do we pass on? Like it could be a big nafkamina. What would be the nafkamina? The case of the candles, you put water in your little things, your little cups. That would be the nafkamina between these two roots of Tosfos. Why? Because if you put water, the water's in the bottom of the cup, right? So it's not noifel lehed l'toich hamayim. That's not called noifel l'toich hamayim. The noifel l'toich hamayim is only when you have sparks hitting directly the water, straight into the water. But here, since the mayim is not be'en, so it's not considered, we don't consider that noifel lehed l'toich hamayim, and therefore, it would be mutter, according to that teretz of Tosfos, to put in water in your little cup before you put in the oil, and then put in the oil, and then prevent the fire from burning the cups. And according to the second teretz of Tosfos, it would be also because what's the purpose of the water? The purpose of the water is miskav l'chaboy, so you don't want it to reach the glass. You want it to extinguish. So that would be also. So it's totally in those 2 terutzim of Tosfos. And those 2 terutzim of Tosfos are machloikas, the mechaber and the ramah. Like which teretz of Tosfos do we pass? Wasif and Samarish Sanachai. Right? And the mechaber says that the only time it's mutter is if it's ein a miskav l'kibui. And the ramah says, no, even if it's miskav l'kibui, it's still mutter. Why? She'ein hamayim be'en. It's not noifel lehed l'toich hamayim because the mayim is not be'en, because it's under the oil. So it's not considered noifel lehed l'toich hamayim. So machloek is mechaber and how we pass on, like which teretz of Tosfos do we pass on like. Now, according to the mechaber, for sure, I mean, pashas if you're a Sephardi, you're not allowed to put water on the bottom of your cup. That's exactly the halacha because it's kiruv kibui. It's called being the kiruv kibui. And according to the Ramah, since it's not be'en, so it's considered only gram kibui. It's not kiruv kibui, and therefore it would be mutter.
If you only, let's say you only want to use a certain amount of oil.
Right.
So regardless of whether there's water in there or not, you're going to use that amount of oil.
Oh, very nice. So you're saying you're not trying, you're saying